Let's talk about it more with retired U.S. Army Major General Dana Pittard. General Pittard, the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran seems to be holding. The ceasefire between the Israelis and Lebanon seems to be holding. How would you assess the situation in the Gulf area right now?
I would assess it, well, hello, John. I would assess it as being pretty tenuous right now. It is good that the ceasefires between Lebanon and Israel and the U.S. and Iran is still holding. That's a good thing. But the fact that we blockaded that area, the Persian Gulf, so no ships can come in and come out, I think is a good move on our part. It is taking away some of the leverage that Iran had in closing the Strait of Hormuz. Iran was allowing ships to go through, like for their friends like China. Now those ships cannot get through, and China may put more pressure on Iran to make a deal with the U.S.
But if Iran thinks that the president is wanting some kind of a deal, that he's getting impatient, are they underplaying, I guess? Are they not believing in President Trump's resolve?
I think they could be thinking that. And there may be some truth to that, because the War Powers Act will come into, I guess, fruition on around May 1st, where the president's got to tell Congress what's going on, and then the funding can go forward or not. In fact, Senator Murkowski's proposal, I think, would be good, because it'll allow the military operations to continue if necessary. But the Iranians are probably watching that even closer than most Americans are. But the Iranians should not overplay their hand and think that President Trump just wants to make a deal, because if the nuclear weapons are no longer on the table, as far as Iran pursuing nuclear weapons, it's not going to end. So President Trump has called them out on that, and either they're going to end their pursuit of nuclear weapons or they're not. So they shouldn't overplay their hand.
And there's, what the president refers to as their nuclear dust. I guess we don't really know what the situation is at the enrichment sites that we bombed last year and again this time around. But there's likely a lot of nuclear material that, could be excavated. If you take that and explode it with a conventional bomb in a place like New York City, you've got a terrible catastrophe. You irradiate the city for eons to come. The president has to be wary about what the Iranians want to do with their nuclear material.
Absolutely. Iran cannot be trusted to have a nuclear weapon. We've already seen what they would do to the Gulf, the Gulf nations who didn't even attack them, and what they did, and then what they would try to do to Israel or the U.S. with a nuclear weapon. So that's not even negotiable on the U.S. side. So we will see what happens, but I think Iran thinks they can wait us out, and I think that will be a mistake.
So if you were advising the president, I mean, we heard him say there aboard Air Force One that he may extend the ceasefire, he might not. He might start dropping bombs again. What would you advise the president to do at this point?
I advise the president to stick with the blockade, because, again, that takes some leverage away from Iran. Be prepared to meet with Iran through Pakistan. If you have to extend the ceasefire by a week, maybe do that. But after that, then the Iranians have to know that you mean business. And also, this is going to not take days or weeks. It will take months in negotiating this with the Iranians.
All right, Major General Dana Pittard, thanks very much for your expertise.
Thank you, John.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.